George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
6 months later and the genocide continues. Massacres everywhere. In Gaza City, in Khan Yunis, and still in Rafah. Even though they say that they are getting ready to invade it, the Israeli armed forces have withdrawn their ground brigades from the Gaza Strip. The German media are reporting this evening that an end to the war is being negotiated in Cairo right now. Well, we'll see about that. Increasing signs that the Western governments, under pressure from their own electorates and the fear of their own courts and their own judgments, are pressing them to press their attack dog Netanyahu to call off the slaughter. And it's open season on me, on my television shows, and on the Workers' Party of Britain. Much more coming up in the next 2 hours. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night because it's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Let me start with the least important things first, namely the Daily Telegraph. That's the newspaper that I cost £2.3 million when they defamed me in 2005. 2003, actually. The case came to a conclusion in 2005 with the Telegraph £2.3 million down. So they'd be well advised to be extra careful when writing about me. But who knew that the Sunday Telegraph, the Sunday Torygraph, a failing newspaper that almost had to be bailed out by the United Arab Emirates before the colonels who read it decided that Johnny Foreigner could not possibly be allowed to own their newspaper. Who knew that the Sunday Telegraph would be so interested in the social media scribblings of some people unknown to me, others known to me and of whom I'm proud, but people unknown to me who are described as Workers' Party activists have had their social media scribblings mined by, I doubt if it was the Sunday Telegraph, if you want my honest opinion. I somehow think that they had assistance from somewhere. After all, it's a very labour-intensive job to find from amongst the thousands of new members and activists of the Workers' Party of Britain obscure comments made, which actually, when you decipher them, were no more or less than what is common parlance in the feverish, febrile atmosphere that currently exists and is bound to exist, you know, when there's a genocide going on, when there's an actual genocide going on. I'll summarize them this way because I wasn't able to read the whole article because that would have required me to give the Telegraph money. And, you know, it's the other way around normally. They give me money. I didn't want to pay their paywall fee, so I've only seen excerpts. But if I summarize it, they attack us for claiming that Israel has purchased a large swathe of the British political scene. Well, who can doubt that? The supporters of Israel have purchased a massive stake in the British political infrastructure, superstructure. The Conservative Friends of Israel, the Labour Friends of Israel, the Liberal Democrat Friends of Israel, all these friends of Israel for reasons that no one can really fathom. I told you on Wednesday about the 2 MPs for Runcorn. Have you seen Runcorn? Both of the MPs for Runcorn are members of the Labour Friends of Israel. Why? What first attracted the members of Parliament for Runcorn in Cheshire to a tiny little state on the edge of the Mediterranean, thousands of miles away? Certainly not the interests of the people of Runcorn, who've prospered little from the tenure of their 2 Labour MPs over recent years. Maybe that's a place we should be looking more closely at. So that's the first charge, that activists of the Workers' Party have said that Israel owns a considerable part of the British political system. I'm sorry, Your Honour, my Lord. I'm sorry, but that one has Veritas as its ultimate defence. And the other was that some of our activists had compared the actions of Israel over the last 6 months exactly today with the Nazis. Well, again, my Lord, Your Honour, when you are a country on trial for genocide in front of the world's highest court and have been found plausibly to be guilty of same charge and sent for trial on same charge, is anybody surprised that people might begin to compare them to another genocide? The genocide of Hitler fascism, the Beast of Berlin, the people who slaughtered the Warsaw Ghetto, the people who drowned in blood millions of people in Treblinka, in Auschwitz, in all of these other death camps liberated by the Soviet Red Army, and their disastrous, ghastly secrets exposed to the world by those who did the most to defeat that Hitler fascism, Mussolini fascism, Tojo fascism. Is anyone surprised that when you massacre tens of thousands of women and children in cold blood, women and children who've got nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, no shelter, no exit, not even the sea to run into? Is anyone surprised that people might begin to compare such methods with the methods of fascism in the Holocaust with a capital H? Well, if you really don't know that Israel has purchased a large number of British politicians, not to mention American politicians, they seem to have purchased all of those, all of them, millions and millions of dollars used to purchase that. If you really don't know that, and if you are really surprised that a country on trial for genocide might be compared to another country which indisputably committed genocide, namely the fascist regimes of the 1930s and 40s, you're not really a newspaper. But then the Telegraph isn't really a newspaper, as the briefest scan of its last 6 months' coverage makes clear. It is a propaganda sheet. I said sheet. It is a propaganda sheet designed for and used for the purpose of fooling the British people into believing that supporting this genocide could conceivably be morally justified or could conceivably be held to be in the British national interest. And of course, neither of those things could possibly hold up to question. The second thing that's happened, you remember I told you about my new show, an irregular show that I do myself, that I make myself from my own pocket, for which I get paid not a cent from anybody? Have it out with Galloway.com. Do you remember? I showed you a little, there it is. I showed you a little vignette from it. Today, the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the British Parliament, no less, gave me, and presumably it was intended for other eyes, a stentorian warning that I must not be allowed to present that show. Well, thank you, Alice Kearney, whoever you are. Never set eyes on you in my life, never heard you speak, never seen your name ever in print before. She warned me, and presumably, as I say, intended for other eyes, that I must not be allowed to make this show. Well, let me tell you, Alice or Alicia, whatever your name is, let me tell you something. First of all, you've just gained rather a large number of new viewers for my show, Have It Out with Galloway, when I next make it, when it next goes out. Thank you for that. But you, nor anybody else, in Parliament or out of Parliament, will ever be able to stop me speaking my truth anywhere I decide to speak it. Now, as it happens, this is nobody's show but mine. M-I-N-E, mine. Nobody else's show but mine. But let me tell you, Iran is not my enemy. Russia is not my enemy. China is not my enemy. You are my enemy. You and your shadow, capital S, and the rotten system that both of you represent are my enemy. So don't dream of imagining that I'm afraid of you or anybody else. I am afraid only of God and occasionally of my good wife. Let me turn to more important things. According to the German media, the talks going on, indirect, no doubt, or at least on the face of it, indirect, between Qatar, the Egyptian government, and the CIA are close to agreement on ending the war in Gaza. A 6-month war that has murdered and maimed well over 120,000 people, has left almost 2 million Palestinians homeless. And by homeless, I mean not just lacking a home, I mean their homes are now in rubble. Their homes are completely destroyed. A 6 months which has unleashed devastating epidemics of disease. A 6 months which has left well over 70% of all Palestinian children, and most of the people in Gaza are children, suffering from malnutrition, except where they are suffering and dying from actual starvation. Not malnutrition, but starvation. Which has displaced almost 2 million people. Which has left the entire Gaza Strip looking even worse than the Warsaw Ghetto crushed by fascism in the 1940s. If the war does end this evening, does anybody think we're going to move on? Does anybody think that it can be back to business as usual between our countries, our companies, our politicians, and the state responsible for all of that? Does anybody imagine that there will ever be glad, confident morning again, either for Israel or for its many friends in the political class in Western countries? Does anybody imagine that we're going to forget these things? You see, unlike the Holocaust of the 1930s and 40s, we've got the receipts, all of us, on our telephones, on our computers, in our minds. We've seen these children in rags, their flesh in ribbons, hanging on hooks, dead. We've seen them with their heads blown off. We've seen them with their guts spilling out. We've seen the children mourning their mothers, begging them to come out from the ground and hug them one last time. We've seen the fathers scrambling in the rubble, trying to rescue their wives and their children. We saw it, and we've still got the videos. So don't imagine that if this all ends this evening, this week, for Eid, or whatever other wheeze they have in mind, that we're going back to business as usual with you, that we're going to forgive you, Joe Biden, that we're going to forgive you, Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer, David Lammy, Anthony Blinken, little soldier Schultz, little Napoleon Macron. Don't dream of imagining that we are going to forget everything that you did, everything that you facilitated, everything that you made possible during this long dystopian 6-month nightmare in which blood flowed freely because of you. We intend to hold you to account. We intend to vote you out, or we will die trying. We will never forgive you. We'll never forgive Israel. We'll never forgive Netanyahu. We'll never forgive Netanyahu's friends and enablers. This was the moral question of the century. Palestine is the moral center of the world. And where you stood on it will determine how tens of millions of people view you for the rest of your miserable lives before you face the judgment day, as we all will. No one can predict your fate, but we can all hope that you all burn in the hottest fires of hell for the misery, murder, mayhem that you have created for a people who were overwhelmingly women and children. You say that you've won the war, Netanyahu, as you withdraw your soldiers from Gaza. But you know, and we know, that you lost the war. You lost the physical, kinetic war on the ground. You've lost hundreds of soldiers and thousands of wounded soldiers, and thousands more mentally damaged because of what you sent them in to do. But above all, you've lost it economically, you've lost culturally, you have lost your soft power advantage forever around the world. Let me turn now, in the next couple of minutes, which is all I have left, to the miserable, featureless desert that we have in Western politics. It's now certain that Zion Don Trump will face off with genocide Joe Biden for the presidency of the United States. It's now clear that little Rishi Sunak, the shoeshine boy for the British Empire, will face up to a block of wood called Keir Starmer. It's obvious that Le Pen is the next president of France, which is why her tooth and claw is currently under operation for removal, just like her fellow right-wing nationalist Meloni in Italy. The price of being allowed to win is that you abandon every radical position that you ever held. Little soldier Schultz and Anna Baerbock, the bonkers foreign minister of Germany, bereft of public support in a way never before seen in German politics, are facing up to the anonymity of Christian democracy. What's my point? My point is that there is now a vacuum in Western politics which needs to be filled. We in the Workers' Party of Britain are seeking to fill it. We're not woke. We're not liberal. We stand up for our own country. We stand up for the interests of our own people. But we will not follow blindly any foreign leader. We will not make an enemy automatically of anyone. Neither will we unconditionally accept your friendship, whoever you are, whatever our history together. We are economically radical. We want to change everything about how people work and are paid for work in our country. We are socially mixed. Some of us are conservative. Some of us are as camp as Christmas. We care not about anybody's personal life, with whom they sleep, as long as they don't frighten the horses or do it in front of the children. Still less do we care what color you are. Still less do we care how you pray, where you came from, when you came. We care nothing about any of that. If you're in our country legally, then you are a sister and brother to us. And all we ask is that you open your mind to the possibility that the uni party, the two cheeks of the same arse that have led us into disaster after disaster, just open your mind to the possibility that you'd be better off with a perfect, big change, the change to the Workers' Party of Britain. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a busy, busy night. You can call us. You can vote on our poll. 40,000 of you have already done so, and I'm only now finishing speaking. It's the mother of all talk shows.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
Okay, 40,000 people have already voted. Did Israel deliberately target the Gaza aid workers? Duh. Well, how else could it have happened? Did Israel deliberately target the Gaza aid workers? Answer yes or no. On my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. On my Twitter, my X. On the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. 40,247 people have already voted. If you want to comment on what you've heard or wish you'd heard, the numbers are these, and it's toll-free in the United States and Canada. Won't cost you a thin dime. It's +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the UK or Ireland, equally free of charge, it's 08081 196 5522. If you're in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. Albert Sontag said, great monologue, George. You remind me of Zola, Jacques. Thank you, Albert. That's praise indeed. One of my all-time favorite American correspondents. Worked with them for a long time now. We're growing old gracefully, disgracefully together. It's the one and only Garland Nixon, radio talk show host and political analyst exemplar. Garland, welcome back to the show. Looking fab as always. I was talking earlier about the fact that people are unlikely to forgive and forget the American and British and other Western politicians who made all of the last 6 months possible. Am I being optimistic? Do you see a possibility of the war ends tonight or tomorrow or this week, that Joe Biden can recover, that the stooges in the Congress, the Senate that have made all this possible, that people will turn a page and go back to supporting them?
No. In fact, I don't even think that the protesters will stop protesting. I think people now understand that what's needed in occupied Palestine is justice. And though this is a grave injustice, and though this is a horrific act that's happening, that when it stops, that will not automatically mean justice. I think the Biden administration, I think the Democratic Party would like to believe that when the kinetic war stops, that people will accept that they've done the right thing and they're moving on. I think they're even going to try to, pretend as though they're the good guys now because they stopped a horrible genocide. But in talking to people and listening to, the callers on my various radio talk shows, what I hear is a fury. In fact, as I've said before, I've had callers literally call into my show in Washington, D.C., lifelong Democrats, and say to me these exact words: I apologize. I was wrong. You were right about the Democrats. So I think the Democratic Party has been exposed. Simple as that. They've been exposed for the beast that they are.
Now, coming up this week is a motion in New York before the United Nations to immediately admit the state of Palestine to full membership of the United Nations. No sane person could oppose that, but doesn't strike me that will achieve anything practically all that much. What's your view?
I certainly agree with you. And since no sane person could oppose it, that certainly means that the U.S. delegation will oppose it, because certainly, if we've learned anything over the last 6 months, that there's not a sane soul in the empire of imbeciles. But you are right. Again, what we need is a recognition of what Israel is. People understand that these Palestinians are, they are the people that were in this land and that they have a right to justice. What people have to understand is that Israel is not a rational country, that it has become, a brutal, vicious country. Even internally, it is in chaos. The people in Israel, though they are in favor of this massacre, even they recognize that their leadership is out of control. So until we start to look at the fiends that run Israel and how this happened, we cannot resolve this issue, because they will not act rationally, even if the UN and the United States says you've got to do things a different way. They don't have another option.
The effort is being made to lay the blame at the door of Netanyahu, isn't it? That if not for this aberrant monster, we would not be in this situation. But you and I both know that's completely false, that this situation has been extant for 3/4 of a century, that this is just the latest, the most violent, surely, the most blood-soaked, definitely, but it's just the latest in a 76 years of massacre.
Yes, well, the American people, if you go to the protests, which I go to, a number of the various protests, the media hides how many there are, but there are any number of websites that show that daily, particularly on the weekends, there are blockages of bridges and occupying the New York Times or wherever. If you go to those protests, you rarely ever see a picture of Benjamin Netanyahu. I think the American people recognize that Joe Biden is and I'm going to use this word loosely, at the helm. I don't think we really believe that he's at the helm, but certainly he is, he represents being at the helm. And I think most people in America understand that Joe Biden does, in fact, support the brutality that's going on in occupied Palestine. So I think that the American people, at least, I can't speak outside of it, blames Joe Biden. They see Joe Biden and his team as the culprits here. So their attempt to shift the blame over to Benjamin Netanyahu and then get out of the way and pretend as though they're the good guys because they stopped this hideous man from doing his evil things, that's not going to go far with the American people.
I've been following this thing on social media, AIPAC Tracker, which very helpfully gives you a little vignette of these stooges in your parliament, Congress, Senate, and how much money they've had from Israel supporting organizations and individuals. Joe Biden, by the way, is the world record holder. He's received more than $5 million for, I'm not talking about his presidential funds, him, for his own races, received $5 million from Israel. These people have purchased the American political class, haven't they?
Well, absolutely. You know, their funds have, like an octopus, gotten into all parts of the American political system, and now they control it. I think that the issue of finances are, in a broad way, are going to be one of the most significant discussions in the electoral season going into 2024. Everything from the money going to the politicians to control them. Additionally, AIPAC has pledged $100 million to take out a certain number of members of Congress who are opposing, at least to some extent, their actions in Israel. And this is also important. The United States is spending $400 million to build a base on the island of Yap, an island so small that it's not even on the map. $500 million for a base in the Philippines. They're building bases in Finland. They're building bases in Sweden. Now they've announced they're building a base in Argentina. And in fact, Lockheed Martin has now, people can look this up, they've now gotten a contract to look into building a train tracks on the moon. I have a bridge, look, maybe 12 minutes from my house right now, by probably less than that if I take my boat and run around there, 12 minutes from my house to the Key Bridge. And that they're telling us it's going to take 10 years to get this bridge up. And from the looks of things, they will have finished their train tracks on the moon before we get our bridge built back here in the United States. Americans are realizing that when it comes to finances, our ruling class, it's not even money laundering anymore. It's debt laundering. And what people recognize is this. The definition of a debt is what? It's a claim on future earnings. They are spending our money for the next 50 years on war, on mayhem, on everything except us.
Now, as I said in my monologue, it now looks certain that it's Biden versus Trump. The efforts to criminalize, jail, put off the ballot of Donald Trump have failed. It's too late now. The die is cast. I'm going to ask you what every non-American asks all the time. With 333 million people, with all of your achievements as a people, all that expertise and brilliance and industry and success in the United States, how do you end up with a final bill, which the top of that bill is Trump versus Biden? It's almost impossible to believe these are the best two people that you could produce.
Yeah, well, I think what we're looking at is the tension between the American ruling class and the working class, and of course the concept of democracy. Because in the concept of democracy, the masses would choose the candidates, and what we're seeing is that the candidates are chosen before the people get an opportunity to vote in the final vote in November. So it shouldn't be surprising that a country where the state represents the ruling class, not only represents them in opposition to the working class. A government generally tells the poor, we're going to protect you from the rich, tells the rich, we're going to protect you from the poor. But we now in America understand that the government works in opposition to the working class. And we're through this all, Americans aren't even sure 100% if those two will be the candidates, because Joe Biden, let's face it, that guy's got one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel. There is no, guarantee that he's going to live till November, much less win it. And Donald Trump, of course, they're charging him with everything but mopery on the high seas. There's no guarantee that they won't, do the unthinkable to stop him. So Americans are, even yet that you say it's going to be Joe Biden and Donald Trump, I think a lot of Americans are wondering what machinations the ruling class are going to use ultimately to possibly see Nikki Haley versus Gavin Newsom or something crazy like that. The most Americans are not as sure as the people outside of America that these will be the final two candidates.
Lastly, Garland, and I'm always grateful for your time and wisdom. It looks like the Ukraine war is moving rather more swiftly to an end also. The proposition is being made to Zelensky. Blinken said it this very day, that Ukraine's going to have to make some territorial compromises. The idea of a beach party on Crimea feels like a very long time ago. They are getting everyone ready, aren't they, for in the hope that Russia will stop advancing, stop fighting, stop conquering more Ukrainian territory in exchange for some kind of deal, some kind of territorial compromise. Are the American people being told about this? Or is this being done like the ditching of the Afghan government not that long ago, something that will happen in the night?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, the American people, if you look in the American media, they're getting the same old rhetoric about, Russia's losing 50 planes a day and Ukraine is still, scrappy and they're holding on. Here and there, you will find the occasional more realistic article about this thing. The problem is that in order to come to some kind of a diplomatic end to this conflict, it will require two sides that are reasonable, two sides that are honest, right? I think the Russians understand that they can't trust the neocons. I think the world understands, looking at Gaza, you can't trust these people. They had a Minsk agreement. They've had the Istanbul agreement, both of which were violated by the neocons. I don't think Russia will believe anything that the neocons say in a deal. The only deal that Russia would accept would be what we call a money in hand deal. I will give you this or do this right now first in return for that. So I think the neocons would love to get a deal on their terms. I don't think they'll be able to act rationally and bend enough to give a deal to Russia. So I think Russia understands this. And I think Russia realizes that ultimately they're going to have to impose their will on NATO, and I think they're prepared to do this, and I think they will. I do think that NATO is doing a lot of, Macron and crew, they're doing a lot of bluffing. I think that's all about trying to get themselves some firm ground for negotiation. But I think that in reality, 1,500, 2,000 Frenchmen in Ukraine is not going to stop 500,000 Russian soldiers, and they understand that.
I said finally, but I can't resist, because it just came back to me. Janet Yellen, who does a mean line in kowtowing. She doesn't seem to know that in China you don't kowtow. That happens in Japan. But hey, they all look alike, don't they? She was kowtowing in Beijing, asking the Middle Kingdom to stop producing so much because the West couldn't keep up. Is that getting coverage in America? Is that not deeply humiliating for the Biden administration?
No, in fact, you have to dig for that. You can find that she went to, in our media, you can find that Janet Yellen went to China, and you'll see something like, she stood up to the Chinese or the Chinese Communist Party or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, what Janet Yellen did was she went to China and said, your system works better than ours. Can you be a little bit more like us so we'll have a chance? She went there and admitted to the world that Western neoliberal capitalism cannot compete with the Chinese system. And I think the Chinese said, thanks, have a nice day, see you later. And by the way, we're not buying your your bonds anymore.
Hallelujah. Some fools say there's no God, Garland. Thanks very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Very much obliged to you. Did Israel deliberately target the Gaza aid workers? This is shaping up to be potentially a record poll. Over 42,000 people have voted now. Either yes or no. You can vote right up until the end of the show. Carlito Chakra says Garland Nixon talks pure sense. Massive respect and admiration for this man. And Fightback says Garland is a flower in a field of thorns. Kinky says, George, is Garland back on Twitter? I don't think so. I don't think so either. Ping 1, the evil of two lessers. Garland Nixon, genius. Carlito Chakra again, mushroom clouds don't have a silver lining. Carlito, I wish I'd said that. I will. I'll be right back. Why don't we suspend all candidates in all parties, in all elections, until Israel approves them? Is that the democracy we want? And we have to ask ourselves, why is the entire political class in Britain in thrall to a tiny little country 2,200 miles away from here, and nothing can be said by anybody here which they don't like? What is it? What hold is it that this little country has on our politics in Western countries? We all know in America it's about money, but the sums of money here in Britain are paltry. By American standards, you'd laugh. Are these people enthralled to Israel for £3,000, £4,000 or £5,000? In which case, they're precious cheap. If other lobbyists knew how cheap they were, they'd be moving in and getting a piece of the action. I don't know what the situation is. I don't know why they are so terrified of Israel that they're ready to sack their own candidates in the middle of a by-election. That's how scared of Israel they are. And when this is all over, we have to ask ourselves how, why, when British politics became effectively outsourced to Netanyahu's Israel, whose pleasure or displeasure dictates who can stand, who can win, who can be elected, and what policy they can follow.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, our podcast is still holding its position in the top 10 in countries around the world. The podcast has been number 3 in Singapore, number 1 in Sri Lanka, number 4 in Zimbabwe, and number 4 in Macedonia. You can download the show to listen wherever you are, any time at all. The ad breaks are removed. Scan the QR code on your screen right now to download it from wherever you get your podcasts from. Let's hit the lines. First up is Terence in Norwich in England on war criminals. Terence, who did you have in mind?
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. And initially, I wish you and your family well tidings and keep yourself safe. Of course, the job you're doing is great. I think we drink from the same elixir, really, because in your introduction, you were saying that these scurrying rats can't hide anywhere anymore. And they can't. your Netanyahus, they'll never be seen on the street again, your Tony Blairs. They're all in hiding, but they want this profile. There are a number of war criminals, as you know yourself. Kissinger was given a Nobel Prize, and Irony died that day. So we can go through history. I'm just so glad that you're back on the scene, and I want you to, get that formative sense, get 5 or 6 MPs and take it in there and talk the truth and expose the liars, as you did with Maxwell, another known Zionist, of course. They're everywhere, but they cannot hide anymore. I just wanted to share that with you.
Most kind, Terence, and that is indeed my ambition. We need several members of parliament after the general election. We need hundreds of thousands of votes. Under the system of short money, we would then qualify for matching funds from the state. We would go from the championship right into the Premier League. There was a poll this week which I appeared on for the very first time, asking voters if they had a favourable or rather an unfavourable or favourable view of leading political figures. I appeared on it for the first time. I entered at 15% favourability rating. 15% of the British population is 9 million people. If we had a fair voting system in this country, then we would be in a totally different state of affairs in this country. We've not yet got that. We won't get it until we've got a hung parliament, until we've got a substantial presence of people like me in the parliament, and that's what we are aiming for. Terence, thank you for that call. Michael is in Cleveland and wants to talk about Netanyahu. Michael, welcome.
George, thank you for taking my call again. And I'd just like to say that if you and Garland are aging disgracefully, or however you put it, I hope to be a scoundrel like you one day. And I'd also like to say that
Thank you.
I'm yes, sir. And I'd like to say how much I appreciate having both you and Garland as voices of sanity in this world. My question briefly before I make my point is, I don't know anything about Interpol and how Interpol works, and I was wondering if you, as a government official now, are able to get Interpol to go after the people that have been complicit in genocide, from Netanyahu and his government to Biden to Sunak to Schultz. I don't know how that works. And then the point
Alas,
I'd like to
not, Michael. Although once upon a time we could bring private prosecutions, and an attempt was made privately to prosecute Pinochet, the Chilean dictator, in Spain, and he was briefly arrested in Britain. Mrs. Thatcher put him up, I think, in her house. And the Labour quisling Jack Straw, then the British Home Secretary, lent on the legal system to make sure that Pinochet was released. And an effort was made more recently to arrest Zippy Livni, a former war criminal minister in the Israeli government. But that failed too, and that's because Western governments have now changed their law to require their government to give approval to an attempt to privately prosecute. As to Interpol, only governments can ask Interpol to put a wanted notice. And so far, our government is way, way short of doing that. Last point to you, Michael.
Yes, sir. I'll try and keep it brief. I watched a video this morning before going to work from Richard Medhurst, where he was addressing the Ecuadorian police breaking into the Mexican embassy in Ecuador. And my understanding of his point was drawing a parallel of how within an extremely short period, Israel doing this to the Iranian embassy in Syria has now normalized this. So if Israel is allowed to continue breaking, one international law after another, if these norms keep getting torn down, then I don't see that we're heading anywhere but like world Armageddon. like Israel must be stopped, and the West allowing this and contributing to it, it must be stopped, or we're looking at like Armageddon. I see no other way around it.
Well, we're certainly headed, in fact, we're already in the law of the jungle, and they're no longer even pretending. The European Union, the British government, the American government refused to condemn Israel's obliteration of the Iranian embassy in Damascus. But all of them, condemned the Ecuadorian raid on the Mexican embassy in Ecuador. This is a rhetorical question, but how does a minister wake up and say, I'm going to condemn the break-in at the Mexican embassy in Ecuador, but I'm not going to condemn the Israelis blowing up the Iranian embassy in Damascus? I mean, where's the even intellectual decency of that? Aren't you embarrassed to do that? I'd be ashamed if I was guilty of such brazen double standards. But they seem to lie and deploy this utter hypocrisy as if it were second nature. Probably it is. Michael, thanks for the call. Irish Traditional Catholic says, George, when you're Prime Minister, will you bring the retirement age back down? Give the young a chance to work and the older generation some quality time in their twilight years. What twilight years? I'm never going to retire, but I'm going to fight for your right to retire at 65 for men and 60 for women. That's where I stand on that. Nick Donovan sends $100 donation. Thank you, Nick. I really, really appreciate that. George, where is the Church of England on Gaza? Silent and complicit and needs to be held accountable. One of my childhood friends is the Archbishop of York and sits in the House of Lords, silent and cashing in his monthly check. Well, what a good question. What a good point. Look, don't think me sectarian, but a church founded on the balls of Henry VIII, so he could divorce and murder his wives, is hardly likely to be a pillar of theological rectitude. And so it has, unsurprisingly, turned out to be. The former oil executive and bosom buddy of Tony Blair, Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, whose son, at least for a long time, I don't know if he still does, actually worked for Tony Blair, refused to meet a pastor from Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus, because that pastor had spoken on a platform with the former leader of the opposition in Britain, the Right Honourable Jeremy Corbyn, MP, PC. You couldn't make that up, but that's what he did. Now, he later humiliatingly apologised for it and said he was embarrassed by it, but that is what he did. The so-called Church of England, which doesn't represent very many Christians these days. In fact, the more woke they become, the fewer Christians they represent. This parody of a church, I have to include your friend, the Archbishop of York. This parody of a church will soon disappear. It's already just a flickering light, and it's not the light unto nations. Eram Ferguson says, BlackRock is part of the problem, playing both sides like the Rockefellers. On line 1, in England, Warrington, is Kevin on Palestine. Go ahead, Kevin.
Hello, George. How are you doing? You all right?
All good, brother. Thank you. What would you like to say?
Okay, so I'm saying that what we need is a full democracy overhaul. And the central enabler for all this evil is the first past the post voting system. It's a complete and utter farce. It's a sham. It's a smoke and mirrors democracy. We need a ranked voting system. And interestingly enough, the Americans have got a similar system. They've got a base, basically, it's a first past the post system that they've got. It's right-wing rigged. And this is enabling this ruling class because it's already biased and rigged. And it helped. And of course, as you've already pointed out, the media, it's like a Murdoch democracy. Whoever he backs gets to win because people follow the screen. Well, with a ranked voting system, we could help change that. It isn't the silver bullet, but it's certainly a long way towards getting us a democracy reinstated that represents the people. And so, like, we can get rid of this billionaire class for a start. And that's, you've already mentioned the banks there, George, which was absolutely poignant. You know, the billionaire class again. And it's how is it that the bank has so much power? Why is the Bank of England in private hands and not in a citizens' assembly? They have citizens' assemblies in Scotland already. Oh, and just to revert back, I mean, obviously, you know, in Scotland, at local level, there already is a PRS-TV voting system, a ranked voting system, where you get to not only vote for who you want, but you can also vote against who you don't want. And so, whereas you have to pick your constituency to go and make a battle in, because you have to vote, because we have to vote tactically, because we can't just vote for you in wherever you may happen to be. You have to go and put yourself into a position where we can elect you and you can win. All this tactical voting, because we dare not just vote for who we want, it's a complete and utter fraud. The whole thing is a fraud. So, and then... Yeah,
and of course, it's summed up, Kevin, in the phrase, voting for the lesser of two evils, ensuring that evil always wins, even if it's possible to discern which is the lesser of two evils. And that is presently impossible in both the United Kingdom and the United States. I fully support proportional representation. I always have. I argued face-to-face with both Tony Blair and Gordon Brown that when Labour had a vast majority on a minority of the vote, they should introduce a system of proportional representation because, first of all, that would not always happen, and the next time it happened, it would probably be the Tories that got a huge landslide majority on a minority of the vote. Both of them turned their face against it completely. The Liberal Democrats never insisted upon it in the period that they spent in government, even though they would have been significant beneficiaries of it at the time. But I think it is absolutely imperative. The problem is, Kevin, that you can only get it if the politicians elected by first past the post vote to abolish the system that got them elected. And neither Labour nor the Conservatives are going to do that, because both of them have enjoyed landslide majorities on minority votes. And as both of them stand for more or less exactly the same thing, then why bother upsetting the apple cart, allowing someone like me and my friends to enter the Parliament with 15% of the members? 15% of British members of Parliament would be 70, 80 members of Parliament. They're not going to volunteer to do that. So we have to get a hung Parliament before we're ever going to achieve that goal. Tamding Funstock says, the Pope is no better, George. I'm afraid I have to beg to differ. Welsh Backgammon says, I finally cancelled my Labour Party membership today. I was chucking a few quid a month at them. For what? There will be no change for the better in the foreseeable future. Well, Mr. Welsh Backgammon, I think you should come across to us. Lennox Daisley says, I'm convinced that George Galloway is an exceptional, caring human being. I've been a fan ever since I saw his appearance before the US Senate Committee. What a man. Thank you, Lennox. Most kind. Steve Jones says, please talk about that IDF has started to quit South Gaza, but cannot say retreat since it rhymes with the thing tyrants fear most. Yeah, I did speak about it in my monologue. Amanda Brinkley said, oh my God, it's so easy to see why Americans love Brits so much. The command of the English language is far superior. Well, Amanda, as the great man Oscar Wilde said, we are two countries divided by a common language. I have nothing more to declare except my genius and the fact that the second half of the mother of all talk shows is coming up right after this short break. Stay tuned. There is hope. The hope is in our numbers. We're already boycotting all kinds of products, and it's working. They're all reporting significant drops in profit. We need to boycott. We need to protest often in numbers and with imagination. When we get the opportunity to vote out the parties that are supporting the genocide, we must take them. And if that opportunity isn't yet available in your area, you need to make it. You need to join with people intelligently, shrewdly, in a way that will punish the incumbent genocide enabler. You can link up your church with another church, your trade union with another trade union, your community organization, your nursery, whatever, with another in Palestine. You need to reach out to them so that they know that people in Canada and in Britain and everywhere in the world are thinking about them, because that is important for their morale. We're entitled to feel a kind of gut-wrenching sadness at what is going. We're entitled for our hearts to be broken, but we're not entitled to allow our spirits to be broken, because the people there are depending on our spirits.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Did Israel deliberately target the Gaza aid workers? And is the Pope a Catholic? Do bears defecate in the woods? Answer yes or no on either my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my Twitter, my X, on YouTube community polling, or on the YouTube stream. Telephone numbers again, US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344, toll free, free of charge too in the UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522, and the worldwide number 44203 966 2625. Fiorella Isabel, long time since she's been on. Great guest she was then. Independent journalist, political analyst, and host of Fiorella Isabel and the Convo Couch. What a wonderful name you have and your show has. Fiorella, welcome back belatedly to the mother of all talk shows. First of all, tell us now where you are, because the last time I saw you report, I think you were in Russia. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm in Moscow right now. I actually just got back from the West Bank, and a lot has been happening in the last few months.
What's the attitude in Moscow to what's happening in Palestine? Is it a significant issue in media, or are they so fully absorbed in the war that NATO has launched on their own borders that Palestine doesn't get much of a look in?
No, not at all. The Palestinian issue has been covered broadly by all of Russian media, and a lot of journalists who have moved here from the West have been intensively covering it because of, as you may know, obviously the issue of people who have been entirely destroyed by a totalitarian form of a fundamentalist ideology is similar. What we're looking at the Azov battalion, when we're looking at these neo-Nazi regimes that have killed the people in Donbass for now 9 years, you see the same type of sentiments, the same type of attitude in the Zionist regime in Israel. You see that same exact type of attitude. So a lot of people have empathized. As you know, though, Russia has had this has played the neutral element in the entire region. They have tried to have a relationship with Israel. There are many Russians that are living in Israel, but they also have the Muslim community. They have the Chechen community. And so Russia is a multi-ethnic federation that has tried to wage peace. But now what we've seen happening here after the Crocus City massacre and terrorist attack, we have seen people start to question why, in fact, the people that carried out this attack were specifically seemingly targeted by Ukraine and the United States military industrial surveillance apparatus. And so you see these connections, and I think you may agree that nothing has been happening in a vacuum. Everything we have seen happening in the last few months has happened in tandem. And what we see is that all roads lead to Rome. All roads lead to the United States and the CIA backing these regimes, whether it's Israel in the Middle East, whether it's neo-Nazis in Ukraine, or whether it is, you have the entire history, right, of Al-Qaeda. And we see that the Russian military is currently fighting with Syria, fighting these forces of Al-Qaeda in the region, and they have been together in this battle. So why would, of course, we bring up the issue of ISIS-K? The issue of ISIS-K is brought up in a way to once again point the finger at the Muslim community, at Palestinians, at Hamas, at the greater extension. And I think that none of this is coincidental in what has happened.
I'll come back to several of those points, but just for the, I'm sure, interest of the audience, it is noticeable the number of young and talented Western journalists, particularly American journalists, who are now working in Russia. It must be quite an interesting colony. If ever I'm able to go back to Moscow, I look forward to hanging out with you in the National or one of my favorite hotels. Are you much together? Do you form, as it were, a cultural, political, journalistic colony there, working in Russia, where once upon a time we were told there's no free media in Russia. The free media is here in the West. And that's now completely reversed, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, you know, what Paris was in the 1920s for the great artists and the great, inspirational people of the world, Moscow is that today. I mean, this is it. This is the area where you come and you really see what you are told, that what you were told your whole life, basically, that what all Americans and all Westerners have been told is a complete and total lie. You have the best transportation system in Europe that I've seen. And I've been to Europe. I've used the tube. I've been all over Europe. It doesn't compare. Moscow train systems are far superior. They're far cleaner. The city of Moscow itself is a complete and total metropolis. It is a cosmopolitan city. The American version of that, the United States tries to paint, is that Moscow in Russia is a gas station with nuclear weapons, that it is simply the image of Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, where it was in a dire state. But what has happened since has completely changed, and people need to know this. And it's not just Moscow. You can go to St. Petersburg. You can go to Novosibirsk, which is near Siberia. You can go to the Far East in Vladivostok. You can see the development. And there's so much industry here, which kind of shows you that this may be why the United States is interested in Russia so much. And NATO has been pushed as this contingent to completely destroy the Russian Federation and to balkanize it, as of course they intended to do with the Soviet Union, because there's so much undeveloped, untapped potential for industry here. They have so many natural resources. And even what you see in the Donbass, the land there is extremely fertile. And I've been there several times as well. And what I've seen is the resilience of Russians in rebuilding. For example, Mariupol, now they're rebuilding Sevastopol. These are areas in the Donbass region. And the knowledge of Russia for Americans is just limited to the Cold War. It's limited to villains on propaganda films that we see and even on video games. But it doesn't show the beautiful culture that they have, museums after museums, restaurants, shops, a lot of these things. And alone, that is not significant only, but it is just the community of people. They're more of a collectivist culture. You see people coming together after the Crocus massacre, which is why you can't 9/11 Russia in this way. You can't divide them. And you also see the poignant history of the Russian people, where they've had to fight Nazis during the Great Patriotic War and lost millions of people, to, of course, then the Maidan revolution, the Maidan coup that really killed tens of thousands. And now you're seeing this war in Ukraine, which, of course, we know that the United States, France, and NATO are belligerent in starting a global war by sending actual troops, even though we know that there are already mercenaries there. And it seems like things have gotten so terrible that people are coming and seeing this for themselves and being blown away. Everybody's blown away by the metro. Everybody's blown away by what they see, and just how beautiful of a country it really is. And I really hope more people can come to Russia and see for themselves, because I was told not to come to Russia. I was told to not go to many places, but I think the best thing you can do as a journalist is go to the places you're talking about.
I really hope you get to a free Odessa and you'll see a hitherto unrevealed jewel in the Russian crown. In former times, I was a frequent visitor there. Let's go back to the Middle East, if we may. Fiorella, I'm so old, I remember when the Soviet-Syrian Friendship Treaty was signed. It's well over 50 years ago now. The Soviet Union, successor state Russia, and Syria are allies for more than half a century. The Israeli forces are almost daily, certainly weekly, attacking Syria and attacking other countries in Syria. There must come a point, however full Russia's hands are elsewhere, there must come a point at which Russia feels the need to defend Syria more comprehensively. And I know some Russian troop movements, weapons movements, and observation posts towards the occupied Golan Heights recently. I'm wondering if you sense any hardening of Russia's position towards these Israeli attacks on their longtime ally, Syria.
Well, absolutely. I mean, not only are Russians and Syrians fighting the Al-Qaeda forces together, and these forces that have been, of course, weaponized by both Israel and the United States. As you recall, not recently, Syria was attacked both by these forces and Israel as well. So precisely this bombing of the Iranian embassy in Damascus signaled, I believe, a turning point for Russia, because Russia operates according to diplomatic international law. As we all have seen, they have been very restrained in their reactions towards what the United States and NATO have done, but restrictive in that sense. But nevertheless, they have been planning their moves very carefully only focusing on the special military operation as a form of targeting Ukraine's military and, of course, the military of NATO that is sent there. They haven't really focused ever on gaining some sort of revenge or attacking civilian populations, contrary to what the media says. But in terms of the Israeli and Israel question, that is, as I said in the beginning, it is a very difficult position for Russia because they have tried to play the neutral party in the entire relationship. And now, when you see that Israel, of course, obviously, has been committing a genocide in Gaza, they have been attacking Syria and Lebanon constantly. They have been very honest and open about their desire to expand in the region, that it's not going to stop with Gaza, because we know this isn't about Gaza. So they see this, and then they see something that I think Russia, specifically the Kremlin, takes very seriously. The attack on a diplomatic a symbol, on an embassy, that's unprecedented. That is something that they are not going to forgive Israel for. This is something that violates not only international law, but it violates the Vienna law. It violates so much of what they stand for. Russia and China have always been talking about the two-state solution, the 1968 borders, that sort of thing. What the UN pretty much does is what they follow. But now it seems, I think it was clear to all of us for a long time that Israel doesn't care about any international law, that Israel doesn't care what everybody else thinks, because they are never punished. They act with impunity, and there is no punishment to them. So I think this will mark a turning point, because this is now targeting potentially them. And again, in the background of the Crocus City Hall terrorist attack, you can't not question that perhaps all of these terror attacks are in some way connected. And, I don't represent the Russian Federation in any way, but what I do think as analyzing this is that in respecting diplomacy and respecting international law, there must be a change. And I've said this for a long time. Russia is going to have to make a decision in terms of where they stand. And we know that the United States is Israel's biggest ally. So we can pretty much predict with a certain amount of confidence that Russia is going to go in the direction of standing with the Syrian people.
Finally, you mentioned it there, the attack on the Crocus Theatre. What's the current state of the investigation there? I see some people are still being arrested and brought to court, people who've been involved in the finance and the weaponizing and so on. This is a crime so heinous, so grave, that it will mark the Russian people forever. It will never be forgotten. How is the investigation going? And is it widely covered in the media?
Well, yeah, the investigation is ongoing. They have been arresting everybody that is connected to these attacks. Now, Russia didn't show their cards immediately. This is how they act. The intelligence here basically allowed these people to try and get away and cross over to the Ukraine border in order to spy on them, really hear what they were saying, and then, of course, started arresting the main perpetrators in this case. And something I want to point out of all of this is, the specific group of people were majorly from Tajikistan. They were Tajiks. And this was a carefully selected group of people, knowing that they mostly represent the blue-collar working class in Russia. They're immigrants. And there seems to me like an attempt to create a sort of a fight within the Russian people, within the Russian Federation, to turn them against each other, because they haven't been able, let's be honest, to beat them on the battlefield. They haven't been able to go after Russia at all. Russia has not only just captured Avdiivka, they have been expanding and liberating all these territories simultaneously. Vladimir Putin came off of a great interview with Tucker Carlson, where the world was able to see, because of Tucker's wide platform, all of the things that they thought of Putin come to question. And then on top of that, Putin came out of a 87% election where he was popular, and especially in the new territories in the Donbass. And then you have, of course, the issue of sanctions and BRICS and all of that going for Russia, where they have really said, we don't need the West anymore. We're looking to the East, and that's where they're going. And so obviously there had to be something to try to discombobulate and destabilize Russia. And that, I believe, was the attempt of these people, the puppet masters behind these attacks, who obviously, if Ukraine is there, we know Ukraine doesn't walk without the United States. And so the way Russia has been covering this is not only, of course, going after the specifically designated people who have been, tasked to carry this out for money, who are really the pawns of all of this, but also going after the United States, going after Ukraine. They have, from the beginning, they knew that the U.S. media and the State Department saying ISIS-K did it was a red flag. Maria Zaharova called it out. She said the reaction was very interesting and it just didn't make any sense. And so what you see in Russian media is not only covering precisely who's behind these attacks, but also who is behind the people that were hired to commit these attacks. And as you said, the Russian people will remember this for a long time, but it will not, as from what I've seen, the thousands of people coming in basically at this point and showing their support either by blood donations or bringing flowers to the site of Crocus City, of City Hall. You see that camaraderie, that resilience of the Russian people, and you see that this isn't going to break them. This isn't going to divide them. They have restricted themselves from falling for this sort of thing that the United States has done to many countries. But again, Russia isn't any other country. And the United States, I think, miscalculated. And if you don't want to say the United States, you want to say whoever is behind all of this, the apparatus of it all, they miscalculated, because Russians have gone through so much, as I said, and this is not going to stop them from coming together. If anything, it actually increased the unity in the people here as a Russian people, because what people need to understand about Russians is that they see themselves as Russians first and foremost. There's many ethnicities here, many different beliefs, many different religions, unlike what you're told, and you're allowed to disagree with people. But overall, they are Russians. They are not there to be divided. And I think that is what we've seen the most out of all of this, and it will not be forgotten.
Fiorella Isabel, neither will this interview be forgotten by our audience. Thank you very much indeed. Wonderful to see you in such fine voice, and let's meet again soon. Let me take a quick break, and then it's our legend, Simon, in Florida on Palestine. Stay tuned. On YouTube, Keith Mitchell says, your success in Rochdale has made many, many more than just those who voted for you. As Roger Waters' mum says, do the right thing, George. Keep right with those in Rochdale and they will stand by you at the general election. I want to thank the great Roger Waters for his fulsome support in the contest. I want to thank Low Key, our own considerable genius, for coming to Rochdale and performing so brilliantly, so dazzlingly in the constituency. I want you all to write this down. I was listening today to Low Key's track, Long Live Palestine. And I always knew that it was musically extremely beautiful and inspiring. You know, the one with the chorus, Free, Free Palestine. But today, for some reason, in a car, I played it and I listened very carefully to the lyrics, which proved to me again that Low Key isn't just a recording artist. isn't just an indefatigable activist, he is a professorial political genius. So write it down. Long live Palestine. Watch it on Spotify at the end of this show by Lowkey, L-O-W-K-E-Y.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's go straight to the legend. That is Simon in Florida on Palestine. It is the global university of the airwaves, I must say. And Simon is one of our most important professors. Simon, go ahead. What would you like to say?
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience, and I hope this will be welcome news to the people who are listening to your show from around the world. It would appear that as America is literally about to go into darkness with a full eclipse that will go from Texas to Maine, there may be some subterfuge with a positive outcome that is occurring at the United Nations. You'll recall that I had previously said to you that the Palestinian delegation were trying to get a full membership vote on their status at the United Nations on April the 18th, and that, as of today, has remained the universal consensus. There was a cryptic headline in the Gulf Times of Qatar today saying that the issue was going to come up at the United Nations Security Council for discussion tomorrow. That caught my attention. Read the full article, as you do in the Qatari Gulf Times. And they then changed the word from the headline of discussion to decide, which obviously has a touch of finality to it rather than an initial chat. And so dashed to the United Nations monthly schedule, which is under the control of the retired supermodel Vanessa Frazier. And lo and behold, the entire day has been scheduled for tomorrow at the United Nations in New York for a decision on new membership applications to the United Nations.
Wow. And you think that this can go through, Simon?
It's been very cryptic because even on that page, on the UN page, it doesn't say the name Palestine. It links to a one-paragraph letter from Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of Palestine, and his letter links to a one-paragraph request from Mr. Mansour, the Palestinian permanent delegate to the United Nations. Now, wouldn't it be a version of the apocalypse for AIPAC if this goes through and the Americans abstain and it takes the entire United States by surprise while everyone's standing in their front garden watching a black globe move across the sky? I mean, it would be quite a biblical outcome. So I can't honestly tell you.
Amen. Amen. It would be the apocalypse now for AIPAC and the other organizations and individuals who've done so much to plunge the world into darkness by their special relationship with the American political class. Professor Simon in Florida, thanks as always. Cyrus Shirazi says ISIS of Khorasan, created by MI6 and trained with Israel's Mossad for the past 9 years, and recently they are housed in the north of Afghanistan and Tajikistan with help from Pakistan ISI. I can't vouch for any of that, Cyrus, but I'm reading it out because you sent it, I hope, in good faith. Douglas Miller says, beware false flag Iranian response to the events in Damascus last week. You'll recall that the CIA said that within 48 hours Iran was going to respond. They even helpfully laid out exactly what weapons would be being used in that response. But response, as yet, there has been none. Ian Ong, O-N-G, Says, Gigi, there's a husting for Newcastle upon Tyne, and I've noticed that the Workers' Party is absent. Has it been excluded? I don't know, Ian, anything about that. I'm afraid our electoral front is now so vast that I can't keep an eye on all of it. But I'm sure that my comrades will have heard your question. Kinky says, I'm glad that Richard Medhurst will be running for Parliament. He'll be running for Parliament for us in the Workers' Party of Britain. Sylvie is on the line from California on Palestine. Sylvie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, George. I'm so excited to speak with you. I love watching your show. I'm calling because I am a Christian Palestinian American, and you don't really hear too much about us Christians because we're kind of a minority, but there's a great number of us who live outside of Palestine, and we are sort of forgotten about.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm calling to just kind of comment. I'm kind of calling in, to make a comment that as a Palestinian and as an American and as a Christian, I feel betrayed. As an American, I feel betrayed by my government. They're being complicit with what's happening in Gaza. And then also I feel betrayed as a Christian because of the Christian Zionists that have a lot of control on our government. And as a Palestinian, I'm so grieved at what's happening in our homeland. But, you know, on one hand, also, I'm kind of glad that for once, after all these years, our plight, our struggle is coming before the whole world. And it makes me kind of glad that people are finally learning and understanding what is really happening there, and it's been happening for a very long time. And
well, I think that's very beautifully put, Sylvie. I'll intervene only because of the hour and the number of people trying to get their call into the show. The Palestinian Christians are a minority, but they are a community that I have known very well. Seems like all of my life, certainly more than 50 years of my life. Some truly great people come from that Palestinian Christian community. Professor Edward Said from New York, from Columbia University, is perhaps the best known of them nowadays. Late but great Edward Said. Shireen Abu Akleh, the esteemed Al Jazeera television reporter who was murdered by Israel in the West Bank, which then attacked her funeral cortege, attacked her coffin, which was in very real danger of smashing to the floor. Her body thumping around inside her coffin, slain, and then desecrated her funeral. Some long ago that I knew, Dr. George Habash, Ghassan Kanafani, so many great figures, literary and political figures in the Palestinian arena. One of my earliest and best friends was a man called Abu George, Musa Al-Ghiris, who was a Christian, moved to Norway, has a big family there in Norway now, who are all still active. The town of Al-Beireh, between Jerusalem and Ramallah. Ramallah itself, a big Christian town, as well as, of course, the obvious Bethlehem, where Jesus himself was born. Palestinian Christians, even in the Gaza Strip, under the governance of Hamas, are freely worshipping, freely at least until Israel bombs their ancient churches, churches that are well over 1,000 years old, bombed by Israel, Christian parishioners murdered at Mass, coming out from Mass by the Israeli armed forces. The Protestant pastor that I mentioned earlier, Munter, from Bethlehem, who became so famous around the world for his, if you like, alternative Christian message. So you feel betrayed, and you're right to feel betrayed in this case, not just by our countries, but by our Christian churches and leaders. Some have been better than others. His Holiness the Pope better than most, but still not good enough. And some have been perfectly atrocious. Sylvia, I'll never forget your call and your voice. Thank you for making it. Keith is in Minnesota on Russia. Let's hear from him. Keith, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, George. It's good to hear from you. And I've missed you. I saw you when we were in Minneapolis and saw Azam Sabri before he died.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Go ahead,
yes.
Keith.
You know, I'm an attorney from Minnesota, and I've been watching you very carefully, and I'm very proud of you. I see your ambition. You would be a fine prime minister. I think you can rise to it. You'll have to take in more points of view, I think, though. And I have one question for you about about Mr. Biden, who shares our faith. Remember on your Easter show, you spoke about the basis of our faith and the way we approach it. And I believe Biden does as well. He's a good man. You did mention something that happened that's personal when he went to the Vatican, which I thought was too bad. I think he could be a friend better than you would know personally. I hope you get the chance to meet him. But besides that, let's go to Russia.
It's very kind of you to say so. I'll let you back in, Keith. But I must tell you that I regard Joe Biden as the most enormous hypocrite who has falsely deployed his Christianity whilst pursuing the very opposite of Jesus' teaching, the very opposite of Catholic doctrine, precise opposite. He's a fanatic pro-abortionist, while Catholic doctrine largely forbids abortion. How's that possible? How can you possibly go to Mass, seek communion, and all the while legislating when you have power for things that are an abomination in the eyes of the church? Ditto his other activities on the social front. But much more important, he has slaughtered and facilitated the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of innocent people, not just in Gaza, not just in Jerusalem and the West Bank, but in Iraq before it. He was one of the biggest mouthpieces for the war on Iraq, in which 1 million people died. Extremism was sent cascading all over the world, and it's on him. The blood of these people is on him. He did everything he could. He was George Bush's mouth, foul mouth, on the floor of the United States Senate, bringing about the slaughter of all these innocent people in Iraq and the cascade of extremism which then followed it, which hasn't stopped cascading since. So I'm sorry to disagree with you, Keith, but you wanted to make a point on Russia. Please do.
Yes, and taking the same point, we have an additional problem in Russia because very, very much against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They did invade. You do know that and do agree with that, I'm sure. So we're kind of stuck there, and a large portion of the U.S. population is stuck on that point. They don't want people invading. Of course, we're hypocritical about that, too, in certain ways. But this set everyone off over here. We're afraid of the Russians. They are afraid of their xenophobia. They're afraid of that government. They're afraid of Putin. And the same thing with Putin feeling xenophobic to the horrible damage they've suffered over the centuries, right? He's inherited it. And here we are. I don't see many people talking about solutions yet because everybody's stuck in the fact that they want to stay at war and get a peace that is going to be more favorable to Ukraine than it stands now, because I think the Russians are going to be extremely tough on Ukraine if they try to negotiate anything now. They need some type of resolution.
Well, look, Keith, I'm cutting you short only because there's only 20 minutes to go and there's literally hundreds of people trying to get on the show. But I'm grateful to you for the graceful way in which you made your points of disagreement plain. And I only have time to deal with one of the many points that you made. The invasion was not by Russia. The invasion was by NATO. NATO invaded Ukraine back in 2014 when it played a decisive role in a violent coup d'etat to overthrow the government of Ukraine, to send its president, duly elected president, fleeing for his life, to literally set the Parliament House on fire, to force the members of Parliament literally at gunpoint, to a series of Russophobic laws, which then led to now 10 years until Russia finally liberated those territories in the east, 10 years of massacre of the Russian-speaking population in Ukraine. The NATO invasion of Ukraine was never called an invasion. It was called the Maidan. It was called some kind of freedom struggle, though it is a peculiar kind of freedom struggle that leads to the death of thousands upon thousands of people. Again, most of them women and children, who were slaughtered by the Kiev coup regime ever since 2014. Until now, they're still landing shells, American-made shells from American and Western-supplied guns on the innocent civilian people of the Donbass. Russia will not end this conflict until those guns are so far away that they cannot land on any of the ethnically Russian population of Ukraine. So I disagree fundamentally with you. But I have to add this. You'll have to forgive me. I know you're a fan of his. Joe Biden doesn't care a damn about the people of Ukraine. The Biden crime family are up to their neck in corruption amongst the American-imposed political class now ruling for the time being in Kiev. Joe Biden was in and out of Ukraine not because of any concern for the people of Ukraine, but to fill his pockets, fill his boots, fill his son's pockets, his boots, fill his brother's pockets, his boots. The whole Biden crime family ought to be on trial, not just for their support for genocidal violence around the world, but for the rather more basic crime of being thieves. Joe Biden is a thief as well as a murderer. Andrew Holt says you have the Nazi genocide, Yugoslavian genocide, Rwanda genocide, Burma genocide, Japan, Hiroshima genocide, Gaza genocide, many more genocides in the world, and we have not learnt. And Paul Meany says the damage is irreversible for the USA. NATO's regime is over. Their mass starvation, genocide, and Holocaust crimes against the Palestinians. The world will never forget or forgive them. Thanks, Paul. On the line from Hull in England is Paddy on Palestine. Go ahead, Paddy.
Hi, George. How are you doing? All right?
All good, thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, great. I'll be quick as I can. I know you've only got a few minutes. I'm glad that you won on Rochdale. Congratulations for a whole host of reasons, internationally and domestically. I think it's the right time. Probably bigger than Batley, to be fair. So things happen for a reason, don't they? So I'm really glad that you got that seat.
Indeed,
Really
God works
really
in mysterious ways.
He does. Yeah, Palestine. I mean, I was listening to Mr. Lammy on the radio the other day because there's nothing else on in the daytime except talk radio. LBC. And I end up gritting my teeth most of the time for that. And he actually said that they've been committed to a ceasefire since day one. And I'm thinking that, my God, man, this is a complete and utter lie. You know, how are they so brazen? Do you think the Labour Party is a cartel now? I think they are becoming a cartel. I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Well, they're definitely a murder gang, and they offer nothing to the British people, any different to what we have today. They have run out of historical road. They have betrayed everything and everybody, but they're also stupid, as you've just pointed out. How can Lammy say they've been in favour of a ceasefire from day one when hundreds of interviews on television, on radio, in newspapers, in columns testified to the exact opposite of that? They opposed a ceasefire from day one. And we can all check it with the simple act of Googling it. Paddy, great call. Thanks for your kind words. Atif is in Saudi Arabia on Iran. We better hear this. Atif, go ahead.
Hi, George. How are you? I'm really glad that you won the election for Nelson.
Thank you.
I remember
I
think it was quite a long time ago where you was in the US and you just completely annihilated everybody there, forgot what it was about.
2005, coming up for 20 years now. I hope I live to celebrate the 20-year anniversary. Pray for me if you're in Saudi Arabia. Pray for me.
I will do indeed. I was just going to say that regarding Palestine and what's going on in the world, it makes me sick, absolutely sick to my stomach that none of the Muslim world is reacting the way they should. I just think that it is for their own financial reasons to bypass the route from China to Saudi Arabia and through Israel. I could see that through the map where they want to derail the, I think it's the Belt and Road Initiative for China. So there is some kind of an initiative for Saudis and other players who are involved. I also think that what is actually going on regarding ceasefire and all that's just all a lie. From what's going on, they do want to actually drive to annihilate everybody in Palestine. I think they found some oil there as well. Sorry.
Oil and gas, Atif, just for your sake, I'm going to urge you to get off the phone now and move locations, just for your sake. A very brave and very articulate, eloquent call from Atif in Saudi Arabia. Now, I mentioned right at the beginning the attack on my latest show. I've only done a pilot of it, that's all. I must do another one because the Tory MP who chairs the Foreign Affairs Committee has issued a fiat that I should not be allowed to make this show. You bet I'm going to make it. Just a reminder, Here's what it looked like. I'm back, not just here in the scene of many crimes, but on your screen with a brand new weekly show called Have It Out with Galloway. There'll be a panel, there'll be experts, there'll be me, but there will also be you joining me as a studio audience online. Have a go. Why don't you, if you think you're hard enough? I like that, actually. I wasn't going to do it again, but I think I will now. Have it out with Galloway.com if you want to join the studio audience. Let me go to my good wife, the aforementioned and fabulous Gayatri. Welcome, Gayatri. What's rattling?
Well, I agree. I also think it was a great pilot show, and I think we should proceed with it.
Well, if the Tories hate it so much, they're calling on the state to forbid me from doing it. Fat chance, I say, of them forbidding me doing anything.
I know if they're criticizing you, then you must be doing something right. So, on the poll this week, did Israel deliberately target the Gaza aid workers? Luckily, we are all on the same page on this matter. On Patreon, Graham Briggs White says, they don't care who gets killed. I paraphrase Tony Benn, when they think they'll get away with it, they will do it. Israel, Britain, the US, and other imperialist vassal states, it makes no difference. We are Untermensch, he says. And here is a very nice email from Noor Fatima in Canada. She says, we are so proud that you're standing up for Palestine and for human rights, unlike the hypocritical leaders. We especially appreciate your views on Sunak, and the sooner he's booted out, the better. Thanks, George, for the great work. We've been following you for many years. And here is a nice one. I don't know if you
still got
remember.
that nail, Gayatri? Have you still got your nail?
Of course. Yes, here's the nail. The nail is here. It needs some topping up, but yes, this is the nail that made it to the newspaper.
Excellent. The newspapers went crazy when they saw that fingernail. Look, let me take this opportunity to say that people are praising me for my work, but my work would not be possible without you. And during this month of Ramadan, you're fasting, you're dealing with enormous, truly enormous logistical issues. You're producing these shows, you're co-presenting these shows right now, as well as bringing up 3 young children and looking after at least one, sometimes 2 of my children before you. So let me say to everyone, nothing that I do would be possible without you. I want to make that clear. Don't be shy, don't be embarrassed, just move on. What else have you got?
Do you remember this lady? She says, George, I met you and your beautiful wife briefly in Rochdale. I came up to volunteer on your campaign. I just want to say that my brother, he spotted me right at the end of your film on Tony Blair, where I tried to arrest him. So thank you for that. Good luck with everything in Rochdale and keep up the good work on Palestine. Khadija Grace. How incredible was that? She was also at the count.
That is...
And amazing that she should be featured in our film without us knowing. What's up with Tony Blair, actually? Is he still holding on to the reins behind the Labour Party?
Tony Blair is in charge of the Labour Party. I mean, Keir Starmer is Tony Blair without the laughs, without the glamour, and Blair would dearly love to do the job himself. But the next best thing is older viewers will remember the ventriloquist dummy that used to sit on the lap of the ventriloquist and appear to be doing the talking. But of course, it was the ventriloquist that was doing the talking. And that's exactly what we have now in the Labour Party. Tony Blair, Peter Mandelson are now running the Labour Party. And Keir Starmer is merely the lipstick on the pig. And what a pig it is. What an ugly, blood-soaked pig it is.
Agreed. And finally, hi, George. Today, there was a drone attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station by Ukrainian forces. The dome was hit on a reactor 6. Fortunately, no radiation was released. Please, can you mention in Parliament if Cameron still thinks sending 10,000 drones from the UK to Ukraine was a good idea? And if so, why don't we just send Ukraine nuclear missiles? This is from Simon in Fareham.
Well, I did see that report. It's extremely worrying. These people are possessed of the Samson option genes. They would send the whole region into a nuclear holocaust rather than accept defeat at the hands of Russia. The question is, do the surrounding countries agree with that? Do they want to? Because, of course, the idea that you can destroy a nuclear power plant under military attack and it will only affect the people you want it to affect is so insane. You wonder that any sentient human being could possibly hold that view, because the winds will blow that radioactive material everywhere in the region. When a much less serious meltdown occurred at Chernobyl, it was killing sheep in hill farms in Wales. If you actually blow up a nuclear power plant in Ukraine, you think that's going to harm Russia alone? It'll harm you and your people. And yet these governments are still supporting a regime that is ready to do that, has been trying to do that for the last 2 years. Wow, talk about insane. Last one from you, Gayatri.
Last one here. Dear Mr. Galloway, it has been widely reported that the Israeli citizenry feel that Netanyahu has not done enough to prosecute the war on the Palestinians. Is there any evidence that the Israeli citizenry, on average, is concerned about the overwhelmingly negative views the international community holds regarding the treatment of the Palestinians by Israel? Regards from Neil Bellingson in Forest Hill, New York, on the day that we saw, of course, mass protests in Tel Aviv against Netanyahu. So tell us, how do we read into this?
How marvelous, and greetings to all my friends in New York. Many of them were on that protest. So I put it this way, I often have, forgive me, I know you think I repeat my stories too often, but that's what happens when you're married. You can't expect a surgeon to operate on his own foot. Somebody else has to operate on his foot. Israel will not, of itself, solve this crisis, which has been running now for 3/4 of a century. They are incapable of doing that, have no intention of doing that. So the world outside will have to do the operation. And we're in a very strong position to do it, because the state of Israel would not exist if not for us. It would not exist if not for our money, our weapons, our diplomatic cover, our cultural promotion, Eurovision being the most immediate excrescence of that, where a country committing genocide is about to appear on your screen in the Eurovision Song Contest, about to appear in Paris at the Paris Olympics, appears regularly in our football tournaments. Israel would not exist if not for never-ending Western support, money, weapons, diplomatic, cultural, and educational support. So if we want to operate on this festering wound, then the first thing we have to do is stop doing what we're doing. Stop supporting Israel. You don't have to do anything against it. Just pull out all the props on which Israel sits through boycott, divestment, sanctions, international ostracism of the kind that I was deeply involved in against apartheid South Africa. Pull these props out, Israel will fall. And millions of Israelis will get back on the plane with their other passports and fly back to the countries that they came from in the first place. Thanks, Gayatri, for that. Now, a last call to promote my podcast. It's doing so well. Remember, you can download it and listen to it anytime at all. Just scan the QR code in the corner of your screen right now, and you'll be taken to wherever you get your podcast from and automatically hooked up with ours. Last call, I guess, is Duke in Cornwall. I don't know if it's the Duke of Cornwall or just Duke in Cornwall, but he's got a very important thing to talk about. Tomorrow's United States eclipse of the sun. Wow. Duke, go ahead.
Salam alaikum, George. God bless you for the work that you do.
Salam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Thank you.
Telephoning just to let your viewers and listeners know that the moon plays no role in the solar eclipse. We've been lied to on every level as to where it is we exist, and hopefully millions of people tomorrow will come out to view the eclipse and notice that you cannot detect the moon because it is not the moon that's occulting the sun. And I was triggered to call because of Garland Nixon mentioning laying railway tracks on the moon, and anybody believing that nonsense is needs their head examining. It's a money laundering operation. The people running the show are psychopaths, and more and more of us are waking up to it.
Well, on that we can all agree, Duke, but what exactly is an eclipse then?
I don't have the answers, George, but I have used equipment to try and detect the moon occulting the sun, as have many other people, especially back. I first discovered this in 2009 when I lived in Tamil Nadu in South India, but many people noticed this at the previous one across America in 2017. It's some kind of node or some kind of invisible body that's covering the sun when it takes place. And this is just a fact.
Well, I can't go with you down that solar pathway, I'm afraid. Not that I'm any kind of scientist or any kind of expert on the universe, but I do believe that the eclipse is what scientists say that it is. But it's an interesting turn of events, isn't it? In the last couple of days, earthquakes striking the United States on both coasts, followed quickly by a total eclipse of the sun. You'd think God was trying to tell them something. Bigfoot sends a £5 donation. Thank you for that. Gigi is my Prime Minister. It's time to evict the leech from 10 Downing Street. We deserve leaders like Gigi, not those who view us as modern slaves. I'm deeply grateful for the donation and the kind words. Thanks to everyone that financially supports our work. The best way to do it is through the donations on YouTube, but especially from patreon.com/George Galloway. That is the most efficient way to support the work that Gayatri and me are doing with these shows and all the other media work that we are doing. I'm going to start very soon an online newspaper called the Northern Star. For those old enough to remember the Chartists, it once had a glorious, glorious past. The Northern Star was the newspaper of the great movement of the Chartists, and it really was a Northern Star. And we're trying to get that star up and running in the sky over the north again. So stay tuned for that. Support it if you can. Best way is through my patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, Gayatri is at the back of the room. I think I should say to her, we need to get in the car right now and drive from Rochdale to London and make another Have It Out with Galloway, just to spite the government minister who threatened me online today over it. The poll results are extraordinary. An average of 97% of you think Israel deliberately targeted those aid workers. I'll be back, God willing, on Wednesday with the mother of all talk shows.